Okay, so I just wanted to explain briefly my history with issues around food and with my eating disorder, just for a bit of background. So, from a very young age, kind of young as I can remember, I always felt kind of out of control around food. Like, just found it incredibly difficult to say no, whether I was hungry or not. If food was there, I was going to eat it. And I kind of tried to eat a bit healthier, try and lose a tiny bit of weight as a teenager in a healthy way, and I just couldn't. I don't know. I couldn't gather the oomph to kind of do a moderate approach. And at the same time, I'd noticed from quite a young age, I was kind of bloated. Like I had a pot belly, and I was very self-conscious about it. And around the age of 12, I sort of said enough's enough. I've tried kind of half-assed attempts at healthy dieting, and I'm getting nowhere, and I kind of really went for it. And I guess I got a bit of a kick out of doing something difficult and succeeding, and pushing myself and feeling in control, and I just kept doing it. And very quickly I'd started limiting myself to 500 calories a day. My typical day would be to wake up in the morning before the rest of the family. I would then go downstairs, put a few grains of cereal in a bowl with a drop of milk, mush it around the edge so it looks like I'd eaten, and leave the bowl in the sink as evidence. I'd then tell everyone at school that I'd had a big breakfast and wasn't hungry, so I would skip lunch. And then I came up with all sorts of excuses to skip dinner. I wasn't hungry, I didn't feel well, I was going to cook something myself. I actually started cooking for the family, so I cooked all the meals so that I could control the food that we were cooking and design it in a way where I could sort of just have part of it in a way that was extremely low calorie. And that period went on for, I'm not actually sure how long. I don't think it was a really long time, maybe a few months. But then I just never righted myself after that. So I started increasing calories slightly, but only slightly, up to about 800 calories. And those calorie counts, I remember the numbers so clearly because it was like my Bible at the time. It was the only thing I thought about. And from that point forward, food was just a maths equation in my head. And I started running a lot for a fell running race, which was really long distance, uphills, kind of equivalent to doing a marathon, but not quite as far. And it was all just more maths equations. It was, I'm running this much, so I can eat this much more. And I think in reality, I was probably massively miscalculating. And I actually ended up gaining all of the weight back. I then moved schools for the last 2 years of school, which I was very happy to do because I wanted a fresh start where I wasn't the person with an eating disorder. And I felt pretty overweight at the time. I wasn't overweight, but I wasn't skinny either. And I had my first year at my next school, and then in the summer holidays, I said enough's enough again, and off I went restricting calories. Not quite as severely as before, but still pretty severely. Lost the weight again. Got back down to sort of the fairly skinny end of healthy. And then it was the last year of school, and that is when my IBS really got bad. So the bloating was constant from a pretty young age, but in that last year of school I started getting really severe constipation, and it was pretty much a permanent feature by the end of the year. And what was also a permanent feature by that point was I just need to get the way I eat right, and then I will lose weight and I'll fix my gut, and then my life can begin. And that just continued for, well, it hasn't really stopped. The only thing that stopped those thoughts about my gut was having surgery 2 years ago, and I guess the food stuff is still an issue. So I left school, and the next 3 or 4 years, I was constantly trying to lose weight, typically seriously failing at it, binge eating, and wound up gaining a huge amount of weight. I wasn't doing bulimic behaviours often, only very occasionally at that time. So all of the binges just resulted in weight gain. And I ended up getting more and more miserable, and my gut got worse and worse and worse, and I just felt completely trapped. Then throughout my 20s, I gradually started doing more and more of the bulimic behaviours because I was desperate to lose weight. I think I've struggled to remember how I actually lost most of the weight, because I was about 3 stone overweight and I'm now a healthy weight, and that weight loss happened at some point, but I sort of can't remember when or how. But I think a good chunk of it was in my mid-20s after starting antidepressants. They did seem to help with appetite. So that took me up to probably late 20s. I stubbornly stuck with my gut problems, trying to fix them by sorting out my diet. And I just felt like I'd done it to myself. So although my gastroenterologist said there was a possibility of surgery, probably it was around maybe age 25, 26 when he first suggested it, I was so sure that I'd done it to myself and that I just needed to sort out my own behaviours that I said, no, I'm not ready for that. And I waited quite a few more years. And then finally, when it was in 2017, so 2.5 years ago, I gave in, and I just said, enough's enough. I actually can't handle any more of this. At that point, I needed enemas as the only way, self-administered at home as the only way I could have a bowel movement. And I was like that for a couple of years before I had surgery. So it was pretty bad. And I thought that, like, I'd sort of built up this dialogue in my head where I don't have an eating disorder. I have really serious IBS or some other gut problem, and that is what causes my problems with eating. If I didn't have that, then I wouldn't struggle around food. And I thought, or I allowed myself to believe, that that was the source of the problem, and that if I had surgery and it resolved the gut problems, then my eating would just spontaneously get better. And it might take a little bit of time to build good habits, but it was all just a hangover from having a medical problem, and there wasn't actually an eating disorder there. So had the surgery, spent the next 2.5 years trying to build those good habits, still being in denial, and just not opening my eyes to the giant elephant that I now realise just about everyone else could see was in the room, but apparently I was blind to it. So just to explain what the elephant actually is, what it looks like, at various points during my life, I've done, and mostly still do, just about every behaviour on the eating disorder spectrum. So the anorexia as a teenager is just restricting food, severely restricting food. I then moved into binge eating, and then because I was desperate to not continue gaining weight and to keep my weight low, or at least not high, more and more, especially from my sort of mid-20s onwards, I increasingly started doing bulimic behaviours. So that means a cycle of binge eating on food and then purging through various different mechanisms. So the one everyone always thinks of is making yourself sick after eating, and I did do that, initially not very often, but more and more often as time went on, and up until 3 weeks ago I was doing that multiple times a week. Probably of all the behaviours, that's the one that scares me the most. I'm scared of the damage that it can do to my body, which I'll go into at some point in another video. Another behaviour that I started doing a lot of is chewing food. but spitting it out without swallowing it. And that was a kind of, I hated making myself sick, but I had this incredibly strong drive to eat, but I didn't want to gain weight. And it started with me eating, like just putting food in my mouth kind of mindlessly, often while cooking, things like that, and thinking, I don't want to swallow this. I don't want the fullness, the discomfort, the calories. I don't want any of it. So I'd spit it out again. And over time, I did it more and more, and then I started going and intentionally buying huge quantities of junk food, intentionally, to just chew it and spit it out. I'd also impose periods of restriction to compensate. So if I'd binge eat one day, I would then fast for the whole of the next day and not eat until late at night the following day. Sometimes I've done lots of exercise, but typically lots of walking, so spend like a whole day walking without eating anything to try and compensate. I take appetite suppressing drugs sometimes. I've got 2 types of drugs that I find are very effective for suppressing appetite, so I'll sometimes use them to facilitate fasting. I think that's all of them, but I could easily be forgetting something. About halfway through my early 20s, I started having problems with night eating, where I'll wake up in the middle of the night and have this kind of hunger that it's almost like animalistic hunger, like there is nothing I can do to not eat if food is available. And I would get that even when I'd had more than enough calories the day before. So really illogical, irrational hunger drives that aren't related to my body actually needing food in that moment. And I almost wasn't conscious at the time, because I sort of wake up and I go, oh my God, I need food. And that is the only eating disorder behaviour that I've managed to more or less resolve myself about 6 months ago through having a more regular eating pattern. And that is largely due to using timed lock boxes, I call them. You're going to hear me refer to them a lot. And it's basically a little box that has a timer on it, and I put a key inside to a padlock away all my food, put the key inside the box, set the timer, and it opens at meal times. And I used them a lot initially to enforce restriction, to compensate for binges and to attempt to lose weight. And generally just that made everything much worse, unsurprisingly. But now I'm using them to try and create a sensible eating pattern and basically mimic eating disorder rehab at home. So there you go. That's my eating disorder in a nutshell. Welcome to my life. Not really sure what else to add. Thanks for listening. Bye.